everybody. Let me get my PowerPoint up and running here. Welcome to AI or not to AI. That is the ethical dilemma, ethical considerations, and the most common uses for AI. I think for most of you, you'll be joining in this as a second part to your continuing education. For some of you, this will be your first time here as part of our three-part series. So welcome in. To the next slide. A little bit about me. I'm Alex Ertl, a clinical psychologist at the Utah Center for Evidence-Based Treatment. I'm also the Trauma, Stress, and Resilience Program Director here. Why am I giving this presentation? I'm curious about AI for myself in our practice. So I am piloting some AI software on behalf of UCEBT. So I've looked into this a little bit, and I'd like to share some of what my process is and what I'm finding. I also sit on our ethics team currently at UCEBT, so we're talking about ethical decision making pretty often on there. And I'm just a casual AI user. Once AI became real popular, I experimented with using it for various things in my personal and professional life. Um, so just something that's kind of a side interest for me. To share a little bit, we do not have any commercial conflicts of interest for this presentation. The risk of attendance is minimal. Be careful about applying skills or treatments without proper training. I am a psychologist, so I'm most informed about the APA Code of Ethics, but we'll be discussing this through a few different lenses, at least real briefly, including the ACA, NASW. So just be mindful about your own professional ethics codes and state laws, depending on where you're practicing. And just all know that research and skills might not apply to all populations. Limitations will be noted where appropriate in here, but just know that something said in here does not necessarily apply to all populations at all times. I'll share that some AI was used in the assistance of generating this presentation, primarily for text formatting, for some initial idea generation, and case example generations. Those will be noted when we actually use those, but the presentation, the content itself is not primarily AI generated. I'll actually share a little bit of where most of this source content is coming from. We have a couple main learning objectives for today. One, to describe an ethically informed process for choosing whether to implement AI in one's clinical practice or not. And that's going to be a large bulk of this, of looking at an ethical decision-making model. We're going to be learning a lot about one in particular. And then another learning objective is to name 5 areas where clinicians may commonly choose to implement AI. So the second half of this presentation, we're going to take that model that we'll be looking over together and apply it to some more AI-related situations. As I referenced, this is part 2 of a 3-part series. So if you missed Dr. Rowley's presentation a couple weeks ago, Ethical Implications of Artificial Intelligence in Clinical Practice, Dr. Rowley reviewed the APA drafted guidelines for using AI and discussed some broader topics. If you've missed that, that's going to be very shortly on demand for a CE presentation, or you can view it free on YouTube already. And in a few weeks, August 15th, Dr. Kimberly Applewhite is going to be presenting Collaboration with the Machine, Exploring Therapists' Role in Ethical Mental Health AI Development. So hopefully you're watching this whole series. This is the middle portion, and there's still one more to go. So to let you know early, in case this is a letdown, I will not be telling you what decision to make in terms of using AI in your practice or not. I am here to teach you how to fish rather than providing you with a fish. So by the end of this presentation, you are going to have a very clear, detailed outline of how do I come to this conclusion if I'm curious about using AI in my practice. but I will not be telling you to use AI or not AI. I'll actually share that I'm still in the piloting phase for our practice, so I don't even have a full answer for myself. Still doing a bit of information gathering and consideration. So I don't think I would be fair to tell you what to do while we're still in this decision-making process ourselves. So most of you were here just by looking at the attendance. Most of you were here for session one, but I want to just very briefly recap it so that we can build off of it. So Dr. Rowley reviewed some main points of the APA's drafted guidelines on AI use. Also, we defined what is AI, identifying that there's not a singular definition here. AI is capable of a variety of tasks and outputs. Most agree it refers to computer systems that can perform complex tasks that typically are only done by human intelligence or that mimic human intelligence, learning, decision-making, and predicting. So I just wanted to bring back this definition so we all have a shared concept of what we're talking about when we say AI. Largely, Dr. Rowley asked the audience about some ethical dilemmas. And, at some of those, there were some responses, a bit of, what would you do? Today, we're going to be focused on, well, how did you come to that conclusion? If you're participating in session one and providing some input on, like, this is what I think I would do, this is really going to be focused on how did you get to that decision? What is sort of maybe a more ideal way of coming to these types of decisions? The last part that I want to recap for session one is just some of the larger concerns about AI that were brought up. So data privacy and security concerns, right? We're putting very sensitive data, client information into these systems. Recognizing that these systems incorporate bias, whether that bias is derived from a biased data set or biased programmers or a biased algorithm, we recognize that these systems carry bias with potential for harm to individuals. We also recognize that these systems have the potential for inaccuracies. We recognize the field's worry of what happens if we become over-reliant on this technology. Do our skills go soft, or do we not become as thorough if we're heavily relying on these things? There is concern about lack of human connection, taking sort of the person-to-person equation and adding other variables in this. Also recognizing harmful interactions and outputs. Dr. Rowley talked about hallucinations that can occur within AI outputs. Concern of like, are we just training these machines to replace us one day? Maybe. And also a lot of discussion on the environment. There's AI systems require physical hardware that needs water to cool it. There's a lot of mining that goes into the production of this hardware, a lot of energy that's utilized. So I'm actually going to bring up these larger concerns in a slide later and compare them to some of the content that we'll be talking about today. And I'm just realizing I have the Q&A open, but I need to make sure that I've got the chat available as well. Okay. So what are we going to be doing today? We're going to discuss what is ethical decision making. And again, I anticipate that a good portion, potentially 50% of this, is just going to be talking about ethical decision making in general, so that we're all very familiar with that process. I'm going to give a very brief history and context of ethical decision making. We're going to specifically talk about one model that's been proposed for making ethical decisions. And then we're going to apply the model to 5 commonly asked questions related to AI. As I mentioned, this is not primarily AI-generated content for today, but the content is heavily derived from this book that came as a recommendation from my supervisor. So I highly recommend if you are looking for more material on this, if you'd like some reading for related content, This is a great book to be reading, Ethics and Decision Making in Counseling and Psychotherapy. So just know that this is probably the primary source of material today. So if you're curious about anything that's discussed, I welcome you to purchase this book and um, do a little bit more research for yourself. The publisher does have a chapter on ethical decision making available for free on its website. So that's something worth noting as well. So, what is ethical decision making? If we look at various ethics codes, we recognize that there is not a stepwise guide for how to make these decisions and how to apply ethical standards. I looked at a passage in the APA Code of Ethics, and it says, in the process of making decisions regarding their professional behavior, psychologists must consider, and I underline that word, recognizing I think that's the only verb in this. Psychologists must consider the ethics code in addition to applicable laws and psychology board regulations. So if we look at the code itself, the only guideline is telling us to consider something. We look at the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics, there's a passage in there. It says, when such conflicts occur, social workers must make a responsible effort to resolve the conflict in a manner that is consistent with the values, principles, and standards expressed in this code. Again, the only guidance here is saying to resolve. But how do we do that? Notably, in the APA draft of ethical guidelines, that does not include a how-to. Luckily, many professionals in the field have created stepwise processes to approach ethically related decision making. These are often published by the national bodies, but they're not embedded in the codes themselves. In just a very brief way, I want to share a little bit of history. Kitchener was one of the first major persons in the field to propose an ethical decision-making model in 1984. At the time, it was a little bit of a Wild West. There were a lot of people who would say personal values are a valid basis for making ethical decisions. Kitchener challenged this idea, saying that not all personal values are of equal value to others, and that we need something more coherent, cohesive, and less personalized in order to make ethical decisions as a field, with them being a counselor in particular. This is very brief history. In 2012, in the APA Handbook of Ethics and Psychology, Catone introduced a revised conceptual structure in a chapter in this book, and they outline three primarily philosophical traditions guiding ethical thought. So basically saying, if we look at sort of what are the underpinnings of ethical thinking, we can see three different camps here. One being principle-based ethics, one being virtue-based ethics, relational or socially grounded ethics, and they also identified multicultural awareness as a unifying theme. So not as its own camp of thinking, but something that needs to be infused throughout the entire process. And this has a little bit of bearing on the model that we'll be talking today. So I want to define what are principle ethics, what are virtue ethics. Principle ethics focus primarily on objective, rational, and cognitive aspects of a ethical decision-making process. So these are universal ethics. These are sort of when we say, like, don't do this because it's bad. We're making a universal statement here. We're saying these are the wrongs, these are the rights. It's behavior oriented, it's guided in rationality. Kind of answers the question, what action should I take? In comparison to that, we have a camp of virtue ethics. These are ethics that considers the characteristics of the counselors themselves as a critical element for the responsible practice. So this is less what should I do and more who should I be. Considers moral character, intentions, and traits of the person involved in making the decision. And there's thought that if we engage or incorporate virtue-based ethics into our work, it has the potential to reduce bias because there is an encouragement for us to look at our own biases, our own blind spots, encouragement for us to increase our multicultural sensitivity and awareness and education. So if we incorporate this virtue-based ethics, it gives us a better chance of not applying things blindly without introspection. Okay, so now we are getting into the actual model that we're going to be talking about for the large portion of today. The Tarvidas Integrative Decision-Making Model of Ethical Behavior. What's wonderful about this model is that it combines principle-based ethics and virtue-based ethical decision-making, while also considering what are contextual factors into the overall process. So here we're looking at a model that is somewhat comprehensive. It's not just going to say, this is what you do, but it says, this is what you should do. Also, this is what you need to consider about yourself, and this is what you need to consider about the context around you. So it's really lovely that it's so comprehensive in that way. Okay. There are four four different levels that of interaction and embeddedness that this model considers and recognizes this as a context for the ethical dilemma or the ethical decision that needs to be made. So we'll be talking about these a little bit, but it really says we need to look at everything from the micro to the macro here. So if we're having an ethical dilemma that involves a client directly, we need to be looking at what are the individual client counselor perspectives here. In what ways are my duties? What are my duties to my client? What is our relationship? How do I make them important in this process? So there's this very clear, like, if I'm going to engage in mandated reporting, I need to think about what does this do for my client? Who am I doing this on behalf of? What impact is it going to have on them? This also says that we need to consider the team dynamic. So recognizing that often we are not working as siloed practitioners. Even if we're in solo practice, we have colleagues or we may be part of consultation groups. There may be other influences around us. So even if I don't necessarily have a coworker and we're all employees together, I might feel duty to, oh, I'm part of a specific consult group and I need to recognize that their influence, their beliefs, their view of me is going to weigh in here. So it's really important that we recognize ourselves as having companions in this and that those relationships are going to influence how we think about things. This also says that these things happen often within an agency or organization, and this is going to have its own influences. Maybe we work at a group practice and there are specific policies of when we do something or when we do not, or they have a specific guideline of how we do these things. So we need to be mindful that we're embedded in this work context. And then on a larger scale, we're embedded in social systems. So we need to recognize the influence of laws, policy, public resources on our decision-making models. And ultimately, when we are making an ethical decision, we want to ideally come to a decision that satisfies everyone at all these levels. So the more overlap that there can be, the more the Venn diagram of four circles here overlaps in that uh, this this specific decision benefits everybody, the more the more effective we're going to be, and also the less stressed we're going to be, is essentially the takeaway. So we want to be able, as best we can, to align ourselves on all these levels. If we make a decision that really only narrowly focuses on one level, there's a really good potential that there's going to be unforeseen consequences, negative consequences to us, potentially the clients and others, if we're really sort of just streamlined and focused in one level. So we need to be broad in our conceptualization here. So I'm going to ask for a little audience participation here. Hopefully, all of you are still out there. I know ethics CEs are often riveting, but I'd like to bring you all in and get a little participation. So, here's the concerns that came from the session one recap. And I'd like to go through these and have you identify which level is maybe most at play here, most relevant. So if we're thinking about data, privacy, and security, put in chat of these four levels of this model, which level is really going to be most relevant here or need the most consideration when if we're talking about the risk of data privacy and security and input we're putting into AI. See A, so individual client counselor interactions, AAA, pretty consistently, people are perceiving this as this is really a individual client concern. And I appreciate, yeah, that's probably most relevant here. Like, if my client's information gets leaked in a data breach, then that they're going to potentially have some direct negative consequences. I also see a lot of people saying D, societal systems, including laws, policy, and public resources. I'd be curious, and we won't maybe go into the details of this, but we want to recognize like uh, what ways are the laws relevant here of what we should be putting in. Also, there's actually I'll get into that a little bit. So let's go on to the next one. Um, if we're thinking about bias, the ways that AI can be biased, what level are we looking at maybe being most relevant and needing the most attention here? So if the concern, I don't see any answers coming in yet. So if the concern is that AI can be biased, and that bias can come from multiple sources within either the data set or, ooh, tough to answer. They all feel important. A and D again, ABC, DNC, AHCD. Oh, this is wonderful. Yeah, so we can see how complex this begins to become. And if we are thinking about the ways that AI may produce biased answers and the way that we might use those answers, there's going to be a whole slew of sort of various levels to consider, like what are the implications here, what matters. So I really appreciate your participation in here. So maybe just real quickly, we won't go through Q&A for each of these just to make sure we've got enough time, but we want to kind of, I'll rename again so you can just kind of briefly think in your mind what level is maybe most relevant here when we talk about inaccuracies, when we talk about uh, clinicians or potentially clients becoming over-reliant on technology, the lack of human connection, harmful interaction and outputs, that our jobs will be replaced, and the environment. So we can recognize that throughout each of these, there's probably varying constellations that we need to consider of the four-level model of what's going to be most relevant and who's the strongest stakeholder here. Thanks everyone for your participation. Tarvey also said, not only do we need to consider these various levels when making ethical decisions, but there's various themes and attitudes that should be embedded in the process. So this first one, triple started of self-reflection. Reflection is absolutely crucial in an ethical decision-making model and an ethical decision-making process. If we are not engaging in self-reflection, becoming aware of ourselves, what our personal values are, what our biases are, what our habits are, then we're going to probably pollute the rest of the decision-making process. If I have a strong value that says, maybe because of a particular background, for example, that if I'm a counselor that believes like all families should stay together no matter what, and I have a strong moral objection to divorce, that's probably going to have a big impact on how I approach a lot of situations, dealing with families, dealing with couples. And if I have not engaged in self-reflection and recognized, okay, this is a value that I hold, it may or may not be a value that others hold or that the systems or codes encourage. So if I don't take that as a personal value, I am very likely to use that value as a guiding star in my decision-making model, to potentially to the harm of others. So we want to keep a theme and attitude of balance, weighing needs, perspectives, and interests of all parties thoughtfully and fairly. That's why it's important for us to recognize there's 4 levels of influence or impact that a decision may have. We also need to stay attuned to the context. These decisions are not being made in any particular vacuum. We need to think about how do they play out across all the organization, all the levels from micro to macro. And there's also a strong promotion of collaboration. There's a proposal within this that we include the client who's affected, with that we include them in this decision-making process as much as well. And we'll talk about briefly those participatory ethics in a little while. So, recap, these are all components of the Tarvidas model of ethical decision making. And these are sort of the background influences there. And here, this comes from that book resource that I shared with you. This is, in a nutshell, the stages and components of the Target-Voss model. So this is the actual what to do, how to do it of ethical decision making. And we're going to break these down into each of these 4 stages in a little bit more detail. But we can see here, just from a very first glance, there are 4 stages of this process, and each stage consists of several components, between 3 and 6 components. And one thing that's really great and unique about this model is that if we look through what these stages are, so we have stage 1, interpret the situation through awareness and fact-finding. In stage 2, we're already getting to formulating an ethical decision. What's really helpful here is this model does not end at the point where you decide what you want to do. So if you decide in any ethical decision, if you're making a decision of like, do I report this? Do I confront somebody? Do I disclose something? Do I take on a client who I may or may not have a dual relationship with? This recognizes that once we come to a decision on that, that is not the end of the process. It adds on these 2 additional stages of stage 3, selecting an action by weighing non-moral values, we'll talk what those are, and personal biases. So it says, okay, once you've made your decision, it's time to reflect. What ways may your personal biases and values be coming into play here? Do you still want to keep this decision once you've examined yourself? Say if you're that, from the example, a clinician who believes that all families are better served without divorce. And then stage 4, planning and execution of the selected course of action. So actually putting it into play, recognizing making a decision is only a step in the process. There's a component to this that we need to actually carry out that decision. So we're going to spend some time going through each one of these stages and components in a little bit of detail. Once we've done that, then we can start looking at some of these specific AI questions that counselors might be faced with. So let's understand this model really well, and then let's go into some AI-related situations and say, how does this model apply? Take a drink here. So stage 1, interpreting the situation through awareness and fact-finding. We bring in that that virtue-based ethics here as component 1, enhanced sensitivity and awareness. So the main point here is that we are going to start by taking a pause, and we're going to do what we can to increase our awareness of who are the impacted people in this. If we are maybe making a decision at the end of a long day, we're tired and exhausted, and we are sort of narrowly or tunnelly focused on one item, and it's like, oh, I've got to decide on this. We really need to pause, whether that be a momentary pause or longer pause. Maybe we need to say, let's wait until tomorrow or wait until I've slept on this. We need to find, or it could be like, I need to engage in a process of journaling or talking to a colleague. I just need to do what I can to sort of break out of a tunnel vision mindset, or maybe being only focused on what the problem is. I need to just pull back and say, okay, what's going on? Who are involved? What do I need to do to make myself a little bit more open to seeing all various perspectives? Component two, once we've done that, is to consider who are the major stakeholders in this. Who's going to be affected? Who do I have maybe an ethical or legal duty to? So we don't want to stop at the point of what is my legal or ethical duty. We want to consider if I have a primary legal duty to do something for a client at their request. I need to, even if I know the law says I should do one thing, I still need to say, okay, and also who is this going to impact? For instance, if there is a records request, or a client is requesting that a report go to a specific school or body, I might have a legal or ethical obligation to release records, but I also need to consider like, what is in this report? Who is this going to impact beyond just the client? What are the potential implications of this? Again, even if I have a specific duty to do a specific action. And then component three is investigation and fact finding. This very much is not looking at the ethics code yet. This is not saying what are the relevant codes. That's going to be a later component. This is maybe, for instance, okay, a parent of a client, or maybe a client and it has mentioned that they have a child that they have sole custody over. And there's something that I'm being asked to do, and maybe I'm being asked to not have contact with another parent. This is a place where I should say, like, okay, I need to engage in some fact finding and request a divorce decree or other documentation that backs up the client's claim that they have sole custody. So this is where we are doing our due diligence to say, like, okay, what can I verify with fact? This does not make us detectives. This does not mean that we are breaking confidentiality to go call and gather information, but this is saying, like, what information do I have? What information can I reasonably gather? And what facts can I verify? So gathering all the information of the situation before we're moving any forward. Stage two, and this is where I mentioned that many decision-making models may end. Stage two is formulating the ethical decision. So, part one, reconsider the ethical dilemma, considering the information gathered in stage one. So, we've done our investigation, we've stopped and taken a breath so that we can start to build our awareness. Now we need to go and say, like, how do I define what is the ethical dilemma in front of me? Who are all the stakeholders? How do I sort of visualize the entirety of this dilemma? Component two is then to go research the ethical code's principles, laws, institutional policy. This is the place where we need to gather the information of all the applicable codes, laws, policies. What are the ones that are going to be relevant to me? What are the ones that I need to do my best to satisfy and follow? And then we generate action plans. The important piece here is, like any good brainstorming session, is to welcome everything regardless of feasibility. So we do not want to stop ourselves short and write off ideas that could potentially work, but maybe they come with a really high cost. Maybe it is something that doesn't seem feasible. It would cost either a lot of money or time and resources to do this, or whatever it might be. We want to make sure that we're staying very open in what are all the various action plans that might be helpful in this situation. Component four, brainstorm potential positive and negative outcomes for each of these plans. So maybe making a pros and cons list, just thinking through if I were to do action or action plan A, what's going to be the positive and negative outcomes. Component 5, we definitely want to consult with others, especially, not just only, but especially if we are in a solo practice. If we have availability of a supervisor, that's a great resource. Who are the experts in the field? Who are trusted colleagues? A critical component is going to be at this point saying like, hey, here's how I'm considering this dilemma. Here's the plans that I'm considering taking. We need to make sure we're sharing those with others in our field. And component 6, choose the best course of action. So if it's item C or action plan C, say, okay, this is what I want to do. But we're not done. We've got 2 more stages here. So stage 3, selecting an action by weighing competing non-moral values, personal blind spots, or prejudices. So, first step, consider personal factors that may interfere with the chosen execution of an ethical course, and including non-moral values, which are defined here as involving anything that the counselor may prize or desire that is not itself in and of itself a moral value. So, these are things that are important to us, but might not necessarily be represented in an ethics code, or may not necessarily be held by other individuals in our field. So if I'm a person who maybe I am a big important person in the field and I have a reputation, and my reputation is very important to me. I need to recognize my potential hesitancy to get involved in something that could potentially get public because I'm worried about what is my reputation. If I value harmony with my coworkers, I need to recognize like, oh man, I'm not open to conflict, or I'm really a conflict averse, and that's probably going to impact my decision making because I might be less likely to make a decision that maybe has impact or upsets my coworkers. These can be things like maybe I value wealth, and if I choose a certain course of action, maybe it has a potential to cost me a lot of money or cost me potential future referrals. So these are all the things that matter to us, our personal time, relationships with colleagues. There's not a judgment that any of these are good or bad, but there's just a recognition that we are influenced by a lot that is not necessarily in our ethics code. So step 1, consider these personal factors. Step 2, take an inventory of contextual influences. So this is going back to those 4 levels that we talked about. And we want to say like, okay, if I proceed with this item or this action plan, how will this affect my client? How will this affect my team? How will this affect my institution? And what will be the societal impact of this? And then step 3, select a course of action. But we're not done. We've had 2 times now where we've selected our course of action. This time is sort of a little bit more of informed, hey, I've done a really good personal inventory. I think I can choose an action now. Step 4 is planning and executing the selected course of action. So in detail, we need to, at this point, generate sequential steps of an action plan. We need to write out, these are the things that I am going to do in sequence to carry out my plan. We're going to then anticipate still any barriers that are personal or contextual, and anticipate what are the countermeasures that are going to be needed in order to overcome these. If I recognize a bias in myself, who do I need to talk to kind of help work through that bias? If I recognize that I have a really strong just desire to like, if I have like a fear of the legal system and I'm going to and I'm choosing something that may or may not involve me in the legal system, I need to maybe talk with people who are more experienced, and maybe bring down some of my fear if my fear is going to be an actual barrier to making the best decision here. And then execute, document, and evaluate the action plan. So document every step along the way as you're carrying out your sequential steps that you have outlined. Bonus, client engagement. So participatory ethics say that we should include the client in the process to A, empower them, B, show value in the therapeutic relationship, and C, enact social justice. So we ideally are not treating our clients as sort of passive entities and powerless entities within these decisions. I think from an early on in my very first practicum, I was taught that if I'm going to make a mandated report, that I invite the client to be involved in that somehow. If they want to be in the room on the phone as I'm making the report, if they want to, if it's a system where I'm typing in, that they can be part of that as well. So this is where we want to say, let's engage the client as much as we can. That doesn't mean that the client gets to make the decision, but that we get to let the clients weigh in, be informed whenever it's not going to harm them. So this is a way that we are empowering our clients by recognizing they can do and should have an influence on our decision-making model. So in summary, we've got these four stages, various components, where we start with fact finding, taking personal inventories, coming to decisions, selecting action plans, weighing pros and cons, thinking as broadly as we can about the context, about ourselves in this, and then planning and executed a course of action. So I welcome any questions in the Q&A or chat. I'll try to get to those as we move on, but we're sort of going to, at this point, say like, okay, we have a model. We have a way of making a decision. Let's start applying that to maybe what you all have come here for, of like, let's apply this to AI. So these are some common areas where AI may be influencing us, where we may choose to engage with AI in our session note writing, in our report writing, recommending AI tools to clients. That was something that was discussed last time, like therapy chatbots, treatment planning, and our own clinical research and education. So what we'll do here is I'm going to start with this question that maybe many of you are having of, should I use AI to write or maybe help write my notes? Um, and I've put in just like a couple of considerations here on the left, and I'm keeping it fresh for us to have these stages, the Tarvivas decision-making model. And what we're going to do together is look in a second at a vignette of a clinician, a fictional clinician who is considering using AI to write their notes. But as we're kind of going to go into that, I kind of want to think of like, okay, from an ethical perspective or relevant perspective, what are the components, what are some considerations unique to having AI write notes for you? Well, this includes highly sensitive data input. Often these programs work by recording audio of the session, creating a transcript that transcript, the text of that is then put through an algorithm. So basically, we are inviting a computer program and potentially an unknown quantity of employees who are involved in that computer program or entities that they maybe sell data to, whoever it might be. We are inviting all of that in the room to listen in on our sessions. And often we are treating our sessions as very sacred, as that confidentiality is key. Of often we will check in of like, if we're on telehealth, are you the only other person in the room? Do we want to do therapy if someone else can hear us? We want to really consider like, okay, we are inviting someone into sort of the heart of this here. We also want to recognize that notes are not just for us. There are potential consequences for clients here, specifically if there are records requests. We also want to consider that there are standards of practices for notes, but there's also variance. And maybe we're going to run into some difficulty of saying, like, what is a sufficient note? I have maybe dual influences of like, this is what I learned in grad school, like, this is what a SOAP note is. And then I see my peers doing something that's less than that standard. Where should I practice? And we also want to, as part of that self-reflection, identify like, man, we spend a lot of time writing notes. Documentation's is one of the most cited contributors to burnout. So there's going to be a very strong, right, when we think about those non-moral values, like if I value time in my hobbies, time with my family, whatever that might be, we really need to recognize how enticing something like this may be because our non-moral values are so strong in this. And also we have again, always this risk of if we're using biased programs, there's going to be biased output. Going back to that, well, what if there's a records request? Someone's being described in a biased way, which may perpetuate bias against them, may harm them. So we just need to consider all these pieces and more. This is just sort of what came to mind for me. So let's go into our first vignette here. And what we'll do is the text is going to be small, but I will read it. And then we're going to revisit the previous slides for each of the stages. And this is where I'll ask for quite a bit of audience participation in asking, okay, what are the relevant points here? What needs to be done? Who are the stakeholders, etc. So, stepping in and also say this is where AI helped me. I gave it some input to write about a clinician who's considering using AI. I asked them for some micro and macro factors that are going on for them. So I'll say this text is for better and for worse, AI generated, and we can maybe see as we go through a couple of these where AI is potentially biased in some, or maybe unhelpful. So I kind of wanted to use this as a live demonstration here. So Maya, a 36-year-old licensed clinical social worker, sat in her shared office in a bustling group practice in Seattle. It was late in the evening, long after her last client has gone. Such beautiful writing here. The sun had dipped behind the trees, and the soft hum of traffic from nearby I-5 was the only noise left to compete with the glow of her laptop screen. She rubbed her temples, eyes strained after another 10-hour day stacked with emotionally demanding sessions and the looming burden of incomplete documentation. Maya was known among her colleagues for her depth, compassion, and client-centered care. But lately, the paperwork load, especially the daily soap notes, had begun to pull at her time, her energy, and more deeply, her sense of presence in the work. She had two young kids at home, ages 5 and 7, and a partner who worked unpredictable shifts as a nurse. Most nights, she found herself finishing notes at the kitchen counter while her family drifted off to sleep. Recently, Maya attended a professional development webinar on AI integration in behavioral health practices. One of the presenters demonstrated a secure, HIPAA-compliant AI note assistant that could generate draft session notes based on keywords or voice input, requiring only light edits. The idea stuck with her. Could this be the answer to her chronic work-life imbalance? At a micro level, Maya weighed her own values. She believed in transparency, autonomy, and dignity for her clients. She worried that using AI might feel impersonal, as if outsourcing her clinical judgment. But she also knew she was burning out. Her sleep was poor, her patience with her children was waning, and she hadn't gone on a hike, her favorite form of self-care, in months. A quiet voice inside her whispered, "Wouldn't being more rested make you a better therapist?" Her family context also played into the decision. As a second generation Indian American, Maya grew up in a collectivist household where technology was seen both as a sign of progress and, at times, a threat to human connection. Her parents, who now lived nearby and helped with childcare, were skeptical of shortcuts, quote unquote, especially in something as intimate as mental health. Her spouse, on the other hand, encouraged her to consider it, reminding her that medical records and hospitals had long relied on templates, dictation software, and now AI. At the workplace level, Maya felt conflicted. Her practice didn't have a policy on AI tools, though she knew some colleagues were already experimenting with them quietly. There was a culture of autonomy among the clinicians, but also a strong ethical emphasis. One of the senior partners had made a point in a recent staff meetings. If you use tech to help with notes, you need to disclose it in your informed consent and document your clinical reasoning yourself. That's not up for debate. Macro factors layered more complexity into Maya's dilemma. State privacy laws in Washington were clear. Protected health information couldn't be shared with platforms that weren't explicitly HIPAA compliant with HIPAA standards. The AI tool she was considering claimed full compliance, but how could she really be sure? At the national level, new guidelines from the APA and NASW were still evolving, and peer-reviewed data on AI's long-term impact in clinical settings was sparse. Ethically, Maya found herself turning to the core values of her profession: service, integrity, and the importance of human relationships. Socially, the tide was shifting. Many of her peers, especially younger clinicians on social media, were advocating for AI as a tool of liberation, a way to reclaim time and reduce burnout in a profession plagued by high turnover. Others, particularly in legacy institutions, expressed caution, even disdain. You can't outsource reflection, one seasoned psychologist wrote in a recent op-ed. Okay, so I want to take my situation, both the knowns and the unknowns. I want to consider what's not included here that we need for applying the ethical decision-making model. And I want to go through each one of these stages and consider what needs to be done, answer some of the questions. And this is where I want you as the audience to really participate and shine here. So, what needs to first be done to enhance Maya's sensitivity and awareness? What needs to be done for her to be in a place where she could be open to recognizing impact across many levels? How do we generate that initial openness for her? And I'll see what comes up here in the chat. Not seeing anything come through. There may just be a delay. Oh, her own research about the product, training, and education. Maya may need to take trainings on AI to learn more about it. Yeah, so this is great. I think some of this may fall into component three, investigation and fact finding. But also this could influence, right? Component one is about increasing our personal sensitivity. And doing these trainings could be a really great way to satisfy both, where it asks us to reflect and incorporate new knowledge and challenge ourselves. But this also could serve for that component three. So, yeah, what are her current vulnerability factors and biases, considering her own values and context and how they may influence her decision making? Wonderful. I love these. Uh, so, component two, say that Maya's gotten to a place, she's not having a knee-jerk reaction to this. Consider who are the major stakeholders, who's affected. I would really love to hear from everyone, who are the people that are stakeholders, who matters in this? Who is relevant to this situation? Clients, clients, the clinic as a whole, awesome. The therapist, the client, and the group, the clinic and the clients, clinicians, and the group. Keeping confidentiality and privacy is so key. Clients for organization and herself. Yes, she's a stakeholder. She's burned out. I would even say that as we're keeping this initial brainstorming broad, her family's impacted. Recognizing like people are not getting time with their parents. Her spouse is not getting time with their spouse. So I want to acknowledge like we need to like there's going to be a real pull. Like part of this is like Maya doesn't sound like she wants to be still writing her notes at the kitchen counter while everyone else dozes off. The governing board, absolutely. So in if we look at it on a surface level and just say like, oh, a clinician is thinking about using AI software to write notes, we recognize pretty quickly this is not just about the clinician. This is about based on our chat, this is about the clinician, the clients, the clinic, their family, themselves, the governing board. So there's many stakeholders involved in this. This is not a personal decision to be making. I love that. Thanks everyone for those inputs. Um, an investigation and fact finding. What needs to be done here? Let's imagine that Maya is at that place of like being curious enough that she's researching uh, different platforms, different tools to use. What does she need to do in terms of gathering information to help inform some upcoming decisions? So let's see what people put in the chat. HIPAA compliance and BAA. I would say yes. If we look ahead, though, there is a separate specific cutout to component to research ethical codes and principles. So I'm going to say yes for that answer of HIPAA compliance, but say that's going to be specifically looked at coming soon. Oh, I maybe this person is saying, is the program HIPAA compliant? Do I need or should I have or will they offer? Because the answer is yes. Yes, thank you. I'm glad I caught on what you're putting down. Yeah, so the program that they're potentially using, is it HIPAA compliant? Will they offer me a BAA so that we can ensure that HIPAA compliance? Current research on the effects of AI on individuals and considerations for how that could impact client relationships. Absolutely. So, like, what does the data say out there? Is there any research being done on what happens to counselors after they start using these programs? If, if is there research showing like what do relational measures show? Is there an impact on the client clinician relationship? I'll say as part of our process of, me being in the place of piloting AI software for us, we called and had meetings with at least one company. And there was at least one company that after meeting with them, we were not impressed by their processes. So even though they were advertising themselves as HIPAA compliant, a lot of their answers that they gave when we were doing some Q&A and asking we were not really impressed by who had access to the data on their side. So I would say this investigation and fact finding, if you're considering software, should be like introductory calls with the software. Looking up what are the like there are standards of data encryption out there. What are the best standards of data encryption? Does the company that I'm looking at, do they have the certifications indicating that they comply with these high levels of encryption and security? Awesome. Yeah, so there's an indication here from that. So the chat, someone saying that they need to look at the employer's policies. What has the client already signed? Is there going to be something that's contradictory here? What exactly is the employer's like written policy, but also like maybe it's probably worth having a conversation with her employer and or supervisor and saying like, okay, this is what I'm considering. Like, I want to learn more about your perspectives and how do we handle these and these future things. So not just kind of being at the word. I think there was um, let's see. yeah, her one of the senior partners at that point had made a point in a staff meeting. If you use tech to help with your notes, you need to disclose it. I notice here this is one of the senior partners. There are other senior partners involved. Um, are there other people who are going to care about this? And I need to find out what are other opinions on this. Yeah, survey. There's a response here in the chat to survey clients. So we need to find out like what are our clients' attitudes towards this? Awesome. I love all of these. Okay. So let's say Maya's done her research. She's stopped and taken a breath. Um, we need to now reconsider the ethical dilemma, considering information gathered in stage one. So if there's been some self-reflection here, we've recognized the vast like impact and how many stakeholders are involved. We need to maybe reformulate what is the ethical dilemma. The ethical dilemma is not should I use AI notes, um, but it's should I use AI notes and how will that impact everybody else that are stakeholders? And how am I going to address those potential impacts? So, like, we start reformulating, like, what is the question here to include something that's much more broad. At component two, so this is where Maya is going to need to research ethical codes and principles. So I believe clinical social worker. So what does the NASW say here? They live in Washington State. So what are the state laws? Again, there is in the chat, there is a suggestion that they look at their institutional policies. So that's something we need to absolutely, or she needs to absolutely do here. And then component three, generate potential action plans. So I want to hear from the audience, what are the potential courses of actions that can be taken at this point? So I'll name like as examples, a course of action is to not pursue this anymore. At this point of potential action is to not incorporate AI and do things as the status quo. Um, a potential action may be to sign up today for a platform and start implementing it tomorrow, having clients sign consent forms in sessions. So those are two potential directions that we could go. I'm kind of curious from the audience, what are other potential action plans? Remembering at this point that we're not going to write anything off for being not feasible or not being the ideal solution. This is more brainstorming and being about more about being broad. So ideas, what are potential avenues of actions that can come from here? Ooh, so reaching out to other clinicians who currently use AI. Great. So I'm here kind of taking that as like there's a specific action plan of like I need to do more research in my way. Like there's this component five, consult with others. So really rely on that and find out more information. What other choices are available to Maya? Not use it at all, use it tomorrow, starting with everybody. What are the potential places to go here? I'll give another example for, oh, yeah, seeking legal consultation and professional liability insurance provider. Awesome. Yeah, we haven't named the liability insurance as a stakeholder yet. That's awesome. To give an example here at UCEBT, our course of action up to this point is to have one person who's kind of half admin, half clinician, that's me, one person pilot this after meeting with a couple of programs and piloting it on a limited use. Let's see, so some messages from the chat. Okay, they're rolling in now. The two I already said, she needs to just get her current notes done, but after that, she could ask her group to conduct some kind of formal exploration of programs and the ethics associated with using AI notes. Awesome. So there's a brainstorm here of like, let's get the whole group involved. Attend webinars for the AI platform so you can ask specific questions about safety and security, kind of going down that path again of like, we need to do more research. I'm going to inform myself even more. Research HIPAA compliant AI platforms to find out more about how it works. If Maya chooses to try it out, talk to her clients about the possibility of this and work with legal counsel to create an informed consent. Awesome. So we've got, I'm hearing about 5, 6 different potential action plans that we can enact from here. What Maya would need to next do is brainstorm potential positive and negative outcomes for each of these plans. So positive and negative outcomes for not doing anything at all and sticking with status quo. Positive and negative outcomes for doing this with everyone tomorrow. Positive and negative outcomes for attending webinars, for example. Like potential negative outcome is like, I'm burnt out now and I need help with my notes now. So there may be a negative outcome that I continue in like experiencing that burnout without help. That burnout is kind of relating to those non-moral values, but is still something that Maya may feel pressure from. And we referred to this consult with others, supervisors, experts, colleagues. Absolutely. We're all considering that. And then choosing a best course of action. So, in my situation, we need to consider stage 3, selecting an action by weighing competing non-moral values, personal blind spots, or prejudices. So, if we go back to the vignette itself, so we see some values of my, I'm looking at this 4th paragraph down. She believed in transparency, autonomy, and dignity for her clients. How are those beliefs going to influence her decision to use AI? How would those values even influence her potential over-reliance on AI? Or under reliance if she is not like, part of this system is we choose a plan and we anticipate, am I going to be able to carry out that plan? Maybe she can carry out a plan, but this sense of dignity she interprets as like, this means I can't use AI, and then creates internal conflict for her of actually carrying out the plan to use AI. Worrying it might feel impersonal, right? Her family context. She's growing up in a collectivist household where technology was seen both as a sign of progress and at times a threat to human connection. Um, so she needs to recognize, like, oh, maybe I have a really strong value of pleasing my parents, and they would not be okay with this because this would threaten that sort of sacred client relationship. Let's come back here to the stages. So whether they will or will not is sort of not the question, but more of like, what are the potential like influence non-moral values that might influence us here? Let's just sort of name them all out. So that's what we're doing for Maya. We're just naming what are all these things that she cares about, values of hers that are going to impact not only her decision, but her ability to execute that decision. And then component 2, take an inventory of contextual influences. Yeah, what are her specific, her clients in the vignette are particularly emotionally demanding. What influence is that going to have if we consider like her client relationships? What is this going to do with the rest of the team? It sounds like some of the people on the team are using this quietly and a little bit more secretive. Is there potential for rifts within the team? If she kind of joins into this camp that's using it, and maybe there's another camp that's not. Also, like, what will her level of transparency be within the team? If there's a team culture of like maybe more don't ask, don't tell, people aren't really talking about it, is she going to buy into that culture that has its own negative consequences? Or is she going to maybe chart another path to be more open toward it? And institutional, we know one of the partners is open to it, but we don't know at this point, what does it say in all the documentation? What are all the policies? What do other stakeholders, partners, or other people high up in the company, what's their influence and what's their ability to weigh in on this, and do they have a right to weigh in? And then at the societal level here. And then component three, so reselect a course of action. Oops. Sorry, just got a little too far there. So let's say that Maya's course of action, I'm going to pick one of these for the chat. Um, let's say her current course of action that she's choosing is going to be ask her group to conduct some kind of formal exploration of programs and ethics associated for using AI notes. So Ryan needs to go and detail, this is my intention. I'm going to ask the group. We're going to do a formal exploration. We're going to say operationalize that. We're going to not only do research, but we're going to contact 4 different companies, we're going to research what are the standards in this field. Again, things like HIPAA, data encryption, etc. And then we would need to generate all these other sequential steps of how long are we going to investigate this for? How do we then bring it in with clients? Is it selected clients? Or is it all clients? Will clients, going back to last session's questions of like, is this an opt-in or an opt-out situation? We need to go and document all those pieces. We might not necessarily know. Like part of that action plan would be like research more about whether we should have an opt-in or opt-out policy, but we should at least have that included as a sequential step, even if the step is find the answer. Anticipate the barriers, both personal and contextual. I think we've talked about that embedded in this so far. And determine countermeasures. So, like, how I think I had given that idea of like, if there's maybe, a group of people in the practice who are using notes secretly and a group not, and that's creating a rift within the team. What are the countermeasures that are going to be helpful here? How can Maya plan to like not further instigate some negative or unhelpful cultural aspects of the practice? Just as one example of like, okay, we need to figure out what are we going to do? Let's anticipate the problem and create some solutions. And then execute, document every step of the way, and evaluate that action plan. And then we have our bonus of client engagement. Where do we bring in the client into this situation? So, our clients, even if we're not asking the client, like, should I do AI notes or not? Like, should I make this decision about my practice? We absolutely want to think about how are we engaging the client in the specific conversation of I'd like to use AI software to document our sessions. We should be considering like how are we going to have that conversation? How detailed are we going to be in that conversation? Are we going to share the specific program that we're using? And are we going to make available all the research that we've done about HIPAA compliance, data privacy, etc.? Do we want to have this just as an email that goes out to clients saying this is something you've been opted into? Again, we really need to think about like in what way are we going to engage the client in this decision? And even in that, we choose like how much would we share? Would we share if like I'm burnt out from writing notes about you? Or versus like, are we going to be more private about that? We need to think about our personal styles, our morals about self-disclosure. With clients. So I'm curious, this brings us to the end of the vignette about should I use AI to help write my notes? At this point, I'm hoping that you all could walk away from this presentation and go and apply this situation or apply this model to your specific situation, that you would know stepwise, if I'm going to consider using AI software to write my notes, this is where I start and this is where the process ends. I'm curious, do you all have questions? Are there parts of this that would be, before we start going into other AI related questions, are there parts of this specifically that you feel that you would need more guidance on? That are there ways that this model, right? This model is one of many that I just happened to select. Is this model have some shortcomings that wouldn't fit your needs, that don't give you a way to answer your questions? So I just want to take a moment, put any questions you have in the chat, anything you're noticing. I'd also welcome, yeah, just thoughts, comments as we're looking at this and saying, how does the Tarvivas model apply to one specific situation of choosing to write notes or not with AI? Seems like there's usually a delay, so I'll give a moment. This model's been helpful. I'm glad to hear that. I hope you all are feeling that you are learning how to fish, that you have enough guidance here to go catch your fish in your world. Okay, I'm not seeing anything else come in. We've got about 40 minutes left, and we've got four more common questions that come up around AI. So let's move on. I think Hmm. I'm going to jump around from what I had originally planned. And because, so I have three vignettes to go through here with the intention that if we go through this three times, I think everyone's going to have a really good sense of what are the factors to consider? How do I apply this model? I'm going to just jump ahead a little bit to this question that came up at least tangentially in the last session. Should I recommend AI tools to clients? So this differs pretty substantially from the question that we were asking before. Should I use AI to write my session notes? Because this introduces a whole host of different factors. So for once, this is, one consideration we have here is like this is much more client facing. The client is actually interacting with this, meaning that we cannot intervene. If we are using an AI tool to generate a draft, we are getting for our session note, even if that session note is something that eventually the client sees, we at least are being able to review that session note. We're knowing exactly what text is going to go to that client. With an AI tool, AI chatbot, the client may, the client's going to interact with something, receive messages, potentially false information. We have no way to know exactly what they're receiving. There's no way to control this. Another consideration in this is our clients may already be interfacing with an AI tool. If not like a specific AI chatbot, I know I've had multiple clients who interact with ChatGPT. They use it to brainstorm. I've had clients with ADHD who feel sort of flooded with their thoughts. They use ChatGPT to sort of like, here, take my flood of thoughts and help me organize them into a coherent narrative. Um, I'm finding my clients are doing all sorts of things with AI and only telling me about it on the back end. These are not things I said I recommend you go do. I'm knowing that I've had clients say like I'm gathered some like I've had clients put in like chat, like text, like here's a conversation with my mom. Are they a narcissist? And or I've had clients who have come to me being like, is this a diagnosis that I've had? Because I was talking with ChatGPT, telling it what's going on for me, and this is what they're saying. So these are all ways that whether or not we're recommending a AI tool to clients, our clients are already going out and using some of these things. I'm curious here. Um, I'm I'll leave it at I can radically accept that this will just be a curiosity that doesn't get fed. That I'm curious what your clients are already doing. I'd love to hear that in the chat, but for time's sake, uh let's not just do that for my curiosity. Let's go into a vignette related to this situation. Okay. Again, this is AI generated. Um, And I'm kind of curious if anyone will just kind of like notice any patterns, anything that's kind of coming up commonly. We'll see if we have time for the third vignette. Like there's everyone's spouses seems to be a nurse, according to AI, when I'm asking for these vignettes. Avery Chen, LMFT, is a mid-career therapist in a private practice setting in Portland, Oregon. They specialize in working with young adults navigating anxiety, identity exploration, and relationship difficulties. Their caseload includes a high percentage of LGBTQ plus clients, neurodivergent clients, and individuals from racially and culturally diverse backgrounds. One of their clients, Leo, is a 21-year-old college student recently diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and struggling with social isolation. Leo has made significant progress in therapy over the past 6 months, but lately has been missing sessions due to a new part-time job, academic stress, and a complicated housing situation. In a recent session, Leo expressed the desire to stay engaged in therapeutic work outside of formal sessions, asking, "Is there something I can use on my phone that's kind of like therapy?" Avery has been reading about AI-powered therapy tools and chatbots. Some claim to offer CBT-based support, mood tracking, and mindfulness coaching. They're marketed as accessible, evidence-informed, and especially helpful for people with limited time or resources. Interesting side note, I altered this because it actually gave me the name of several chatbots. So we can already see the influence of AI if I had been actually asking this question of and doing like my own research of like what's a good chatbot to use. This is giving me a starting point for better for worse. We'll talk about some pros and cons of that, but I do want to acknowledge I modified this paragraph a little bit. Um, Avery is intrigued. They like the idea of giving clients tools they can use between sessions, especially ones that might increase self-awareness and coping. But they hesitate. They wonder, do these tools actually support clinical goals, or do they simulate therapy without the necessary nuance? Will recommending an AI chatbot implicitly suggest to Leo that therapy can be automated? Will Leo rely on it in ways that avoid deeper emotional work? Are they going to engage in avoidance here? How might a chatbot respond to sensitive disclosures like trauma or suicidal ideation, especially for clients from marginalized identities whose experiences are often misread by algorithms? From a systems lens, Avery is also aware of broader cultural trends. Mental health care is increasingly commodified and digitalized, and they feel the pressure for the therapist to keep up, quote unquote, with tech savvy clients. But they also remember a recent case where a friend's teenager disclosed self harm to a chatbot and received an inadequate scripted response. And through these tools, and though these tools may be useful adjuncts, Avery isn't sure if they've been tested enough with diverse populations or if they account for cultural, gender, and neurodivergent complexities. In consultation with peers, they find a range of opinions. One therapist calls AI tools a modern day workbook, while another insists they're a dangerous shortcut that could disrupt the client therapist alliance. Their clinical supervisor recommends developing a clear rationale and obtaining informed consent if suggesting an AI based tool. Back in session, Leo waits for the response. ChatGPT, you're so dramatic. So let's go through, just as we did before, maybe a little bit more quickly, since we're getting in the rhythm of this, and go through each one of the four stages, thinking about Avery and her client Leo, and say, what do we need to do here? Um, I think I'll just kind of highlight maybe more critical components and not necessarily go one by one in each of these. But big component here, number two, who are the stakeholders? Who is going to be affected here in this decision to support Leo using an AI chatbot outside of the therapy that they're somewhat attending these days? Who are the stakeholders? I'm assuming people are typing and we're waiting for them to come in. I'll wait for some responses to come in here. Who are the stakeholders here? Leo, the clinician, the agency, client therapist. I'll wait for one more response, then I'll add in a couple of my ideas as well. Leo, therapist, and agency. Okay. I would also say because we're in this brainstorming session, other potential stakeholders, right? Leo's diagnosed with GAD and is socially isolated. Yeah, his family. I want to start thinking of like who are the people in Leo's life that are being affected by Leo's isolation. So we can kind of maybe take some creative leaps here and think of like who is Leo isolating from? So potentially from his family, from friends, from maybe like a romantic partner. If we think about like we maybe don't have an ethical or legal responsibility to Leo's friends to get Leo engaging with them again, but we want to recognize that they, even if very small and tiny, they are a potential stakeholder in this. They are someone who will be affected by our decision. His family, like, right, some of the concern is like, what if Leo puts in some really like sensitive information here? Like, what if Leo they're not attending therapy regularly? What if they develop suicidal ideation? What if there's some risk involved? What if something were to happen? How would his family be impacted, given that there would be potentially be less oversight over his care? So yeah, so really want to encourage you all to think of major stakeholders, um, think of all the stakeholders here. Even if we do not have that responsibility legally to them, we still want to acknowledge their presence, that they'll be impacted, and that maybe we're worried about that impact. Maybe that's one of those non-moral values of just like, oh man, I had a friend who abandoned me way long ago, so I'm really sensitive to friends ghosting other people. So it's really important for me to Leo succeeds in this way, right? We need to recognize the ways that we're biased. If a family member is paying, they also might prefer AI versus paid therapists. Yeah. If there's a third party payer involved, where we mentioned insurance liability companies being stakeholders, right? Insurance is a stakeholder too. Who is paying for this? Both on that like micro level of like, are his parents paying for this? And that micro level that we said, like, as clinicians, are we going to train these AI models so well that we are out of a job? Are we moving towards a system in some dystopian future where insurance does not cover human-based interaction therapy anymore and everything's moved to AI? Like we want to kind of consider these on each of those four levels from micro to macro that we talked about. Stage two, formulating an ethical decision. Um, so thinking of things here, what is potentially unique compared to our last vignette? So we would all recognize now we need to consider this ethical dilemma, considering all the stakeholders. Um, we skipped over doing investigation and fact finding, but that would obviously be part of this. Like we would need to find out what AI chatbot are you looking at using? What does the research show on AI chatbots? What can I learn about this AI chatbot? Um, so we need to do that investigation, fact finding, reconsider all of that, and think of like, okay, what do we do here? And component three, generate potential action plans. So there's not one, with many ethical dilemmas, there's not one correct answer. In some ways, like we could be stuck in a place of viewing this from a either or perspective. Do we recommend and say yes, chatbot to Leo, or do we say like no, stay away from those? They're harmful. what do we say? There's probably a lot of room in between. So I'm curious from the audience, what are all the potential action plans that we can take at this point? Let's get at least three different action plans from the audience here. Discuss with client their level of comfort or buy-in. Weigh pros and cons uh, of AI use with Leo. Oh, I love that participatory ethics right there. Like, let's make a pro and con list together. Say yes, but closely monitor. Maybe like yes, but also can you show me the logs that are coming from this? Discuss it with them. Awesome. So we can very see this is not an either or situation. This is not dichotomous in that way. I know this is apples and oranges, but I wouldn't recommend a workbook to a client without first having familiarity with the workbook and consider if the workbook is appropriate to the particular client or not. Possible benefit or adverse impact of workbook. Seems I would likewise use this line of thought regarding AI. Yeah, do we want to say like I'm not going to recommend this unless it's something that I use in my personal therapy, or I maybe pretend to be a mock client? I love that idea. So, of course, we want to make sure we're going to consult with others, not do this in a social vacuum. Consider supervisors, trusted colleagues who are the experts in this field. Choose the best course of action. And again, emphasizing here, choosing a course of action is not the end of the process. Why? Because we may have these non-moral values that may impede us from going with the course of action, whether from enacting it at all, right? Like we could come to a decision and not engage in it at all, or we may stray off course because we have this, maybe in the case with Leo, we say yes, but maybe we're a clinician who has kind of looks like an inherent fear of technology or discomfort with technology. So we kind of create this detailed plan of like, let's do all the pros and cons, and let's monitor text and everything. And then maybe I'm a clinician who it's like, when it comes time to do that, I like shy away and avoid it. Maybe I receive the text that I asked for to review with Leo, but like because this is so aversive to me, like I keep saying like I'll do it later, and it doesn't happen. Ooh, we have another comment in the chat. I wouldn't recommend it at this point. I'm just not confident in how this impacts that therapy process. More information needed still. Great. So here we need to take an inventory of all the contextual influences. It's not just the clinician and Leo. But what are the components involved in that relationship? Is Leo going to be really bummed out that I'm saying like, hey, you've come up with your own idea, like you've done your homework, but I'm going to say no, you can't go that direction, or I don't approve of it, or give kind of hidden messages that like I'm saying yes, but really, like you can tell I'm disappointed if you would actually do this. What are going to be the team impacts? How does this impact, like if certain members of this practice are encouraging these things, but other members of the practice are discouraging these? Are there institutional policies at play? And consider societal levels. Are there pressures, influences there that we want to kind of account for? Like if Leo is 21 years old, they're growing up in a generation where social media is a larger influence, where there's potentially more trust of technology over people. Are we like, is that a good or bad thing? And are we encouraging further distrust of people and further reliance on technology? Um, from a really abstract level of like, are we having them contribute to a data economy where, as a society, everyone's information is held and accessible to large companies that can then potentially have sway. I listened to this really cool podcast recently that was discussing of like, potentially democracy is threatened if large companies hold lots of data about individuals and then can influence individuals at a macro level. So if we have these companies that have all our information and we're giving them even more information, this really personal, individualized, this is my innermost feelings. There's like a lot of data out there that companies could use, analyze, and learn like, hey, how do I sway people's opinions? Um, so it is potentially like from this very macro level, are we empowering large companies to have more ability to sway us in who we vote for or whether we vote or not or other decisions that we make? So broad conversation to have here, all the way from like Leo to threats to democracy. And we at least need to consider like, what way am I participating in this? Planning and executing. So for Leo, we need to generate detailed sequential steps of an action plan, anticipate all the barriers, my internal barriers, the contextual barriers, determine what countermeasures, and then execute and document this plan with Leo. And I love participatory ethics is already built in because this is Leo bringing it to us. I really like that idea of doing pros and cons, having that deeper conversation with them. Questions, comments on this question of should I use, so come and take us back. Ah, I'm lost in my slides here. Should I recommend AI tools to comments to clients? We've got a little under 20 minutes and a couple of more situations to run through. I don't know if we'll fully do any more vignettes. We'll see. Okay, so we've had two walkthroughs with vignettes of applying this ethical decision-making model. Maybe let's, rather than going in depth into a vignette, let's maybe sort of talk about these more at a conceptual consideration level, because I think probably at this point we're able to do that and anticipate where is this going to impact the various stages and components. So, common question, should I use AI to help write psychological reports? Maybe I'm someone who does a lot of assessment and I'm routinely writing 10 plus page reports, integrating lots of information from personality measures and other measures, writing very detailed summaries of information that's reported. Or maybe this is good thinking of like I work in a solo practice or a larger agency where the standard is a really detailed intake report. And if I'm writing a detailed several page intake report for every new client that I have, what impact is that going to have on me? Where may AI help? So some considerations, uh, yes, neuropsychological reports. Um, that's from a comment. So client facing, meaning that often for these reports, especially if someone's coming us for primarily for assessment rather than psychotherapy, we're anticipating this client is going to receive this report. They're probably going to read it over, or at least sections of it, in a very detailed fashion. And we want to consider like, what is this going to do if clients can tell that AI generated some of this data? Um, I I'm flanking on the word. Maybe someone in the chat can help me. But Dr. Rowley from last time pointed out that AI often uses these double hyphens um, instead of commas in writing. Like that's kind of one of the tells that a text is AI generated. So what is going to happen if I use AI to help write a psychological report and my client is reading this and says like, hey, no humans tend to use this language or this punctuation. M dash, yes, thank you. Um, and what's that going to do for client trust in us? If we're writing things that are routinely being viewed either in legal systems, in school systems, what does that do for the trust of myself as in my reputation or for the profession at large? If people are coming in investing large sums of money and or time for reports, if I saw an M dash in a psychological report on me, it would certainly make me question of like, how much of this was written by AI or not? Did my clinician just plug a bunch of stuff in and have AI write a report, and this is the AI's determination? So there's so many risk here with it being client facing that it can really deteriorate trust. Even if what's been said is accurate, even if what has, we've gone through and used what we're supposed to do in terms of the methods of have it generate a draft and then we review every single word and repurpose or rewrite what we need to. Even if we do that, our clients may still lose trust in us. Another consideration here, specifically for writing psychological reports, for neuropsychological reports, um, AI, and this is something I've heard from people like in other fields who use AI a lot, like AI is pretty good at generating summaries. That if you give it a whole bunch of text, coherent or maybe even slightly less than coherent, AI does like a pretty good job of like, what are the main points? How do we summarize things here? So there could be a strong pull and maybe potential use here for when we are considering like in our psychological reports, our intake reports, our neuropsych reports, if we're working on summary sessions, there's a pull here of like, hey, I wonder if AI can do this well. Um, AI also has a strength in creating narratives. So, all the vignettes that we've looked at, all that text is AI generated. And it could be tempting to plug in, like, here are the results. Someone scored XYZ on even just like a simple measure like a PCL, or maybe we feed it something more complex of like, here are the results of an MMPI. Create a narrative form based on this. So we may be tempted to do that because maybe we're seeing that work well in other areas. But we also see with AI, it lacks the ability to hold all the pieces that we would hold as relevant as clinicians. So, like, even though it may, in a way, give a coherent narrative, this coherent narrative is probably lacking like the golden thread or sort of like thrust of what we're saying about how we're conceptualizing a client's presenting concern or client's ability to say, maybe the referral question is, I've had clients come in and be like, how likely am I to succeed at college? And they want to understand like what is their level of executive functioning in various ways. An AI could probably write something that sounds pretty convincing, but it's not going to have the clinical judgment of someone who can kind of think in that broader picture and say like, here's likely barriers to succeeding in college. Here are ways to overcome that barrier. There's just like a lot of context that AI is not going to keep available and is not going to have that experience with. Just coming up on about 10 minutes left, so I want to go into some of these other questions. Should I involve AI in treatment planning? AI can be good at idea generation. If we were to give it a prompt of like, for someone with depression, what would be a good course of treatment? AI is, potentially going to give us lots of options. And the idea here is like, okay, this could maybe help us in idea generation, but I would ask the question of like, if we're looking for this toward AI for idea generation of like, what treatment should I provide? um, we can anticipate that that starting point is probably going to bias us in where we go. So if I ask AI versus a colleague, of like what direction should I take in treatment with this? Maybe someone's got presenting comorbid diagnoses and they're experiencing challenge in two different areas. And I'm kind of thinking, what area should we address first? And what would be sort of the way to balance that? I might get a different answer from AI versus a colleague. And if I get the answer first from AI, am I going to have some like internal bias toward it? Is there going to be more of like a primacy effect that takes here? So we want to consider like, even if we're looking at just developing ideas, there's still a risk here because there's this idea of like, where are we not looking? For one thing, we may not be looking toward the client, right? If we have this really seemingly wonderful tool that can write an entire treatment plan and it even appears nuanced to us, does that then deter us from collaborating with our clients? Do we start to see collaborating with our clients on a treatment plan as something that's burdensome, as takes more time? If we're getting into a rhythm of just like, I could just plug this into AI and have them complete a treatment plan for me. I'm curious, with just a few minutes left, I think we do have time for the audience. What would you see as pros and cons of using AI to generate treatment plans? I'm not asking who are the stakeholders, I'm not going through those individual components, but since we're kind of talking at this higher level, what potential pros and cons do you see, big picture here, of involving AI in treatment planning? Overdependence? Might allow for better access if treatment planning doesn't take as long. It might be helpful to have other insights. AI is very good at seeing abstract relationships and might generate ideas about what is latent in the data that clinician might not see at first. Personally, I love it. It gives a great starting point and then can be edited to fit the client. It can also help meet insurance requirements. Yeah, a stakeholder of the insurance companies, and we are feeling the pressure. I think AI has benefits to starting the process and getting a general direction started, which can then be refined by clinician and client before being finalized. Yeah, so I'm hearing lots of pros in the chat. I think the one con I think I see is overdependence. And I can imagine overdependence being I use it too readily and give too much trust in it that I then am not looking at it as carefully, or maybe my skills start to go soft. If I'm outsourcing this part of my work, am I going to be able to come up with my own ideas as frequently or as easily as I can now if I'm reliant on a system? Let's see. Willie's treatment planner has been a source of ideas and sometimes are incorporated in some EHRs already, but this would be different from using AI for treatment planning, question mark. I think with whether the treatment plan would be customized and included client input. I worry about laziness, not at first, but gradually. Yeah, that gradual creep in. What does this look like after 5, 10 years of repeated use? Okay. Worries about laziness are always present at the introduction of new technology. Few of us would worry that we should be writing longhand these days. Okay, I love this discussion. I'm going to go into our last question here. Should I involve AI in my research and education? So maybe I'm just hearing about a new type of therapy. Um, maybe I'm hearing about RODBT for the first time or maybe I've heard of it, but I don't know much about it. Should I go to ChatGPT or other resources and say, like, tell me about this type of therapy that I'm not as familiar with? So obviously some considerations here. There's risks of baseless information. And again, even if fact checked, our starting points may bias a direction. If we're going here for idea generation, I'm seeing like a lot of people in the chat really prize and I appreciate like these are more ideas of things I might not have come up with on my own. Um, but again, we recognize that if we're using this as a starting point, sometimes our starting points bias where our endpoints are. We have just about 5 minutes. Any other um, pros and cons involved in using this in my own personal research and education? Pros and cons to going to an AI tool to say, teach me about this. And I'm kind of staying focused here in clinical practice. I'm not talking so much about what is this if I am more of like a professional researcher and I'm using it in that regard. I'm being a little bit more practice focused here. I'll say, I'm not seeing any comments in the chat. I'll name one pro of being taught by ChatGPT. And I just saw this week advertisements from it that it has like a new sort of like algorithm and system that's made to help with learning of topical content. Um, One thing is like, oh man, that's free. I could maybe look up a bunch of research articles and be met with paywalls that I either pay or maybe I just am deterred from. And then maybe I'm going to less reputable resources. Is a common website on the internet more or less reputable than going to an AI tool to say, teach me about this type of therapy or teach me about this type of clinical presentation? One pro here that would be a big draw for people is that ease of access, that instant answer that comes for free. Ooh, someone put openevidence.com for doing research in the chat. Thank you for that AI alternative. I'm not familiar with what that is, but based on the title of it, I'm just maybe the poster can tell us, give us a little summary of what that is. So I'll give my quick summary here. Um, Ethical decision making is a process. It is not just uh, come to a conclusion. It is an entire background process that happens leading up to that conclusion. These processes need to be thoroughly and higher, like thought as a thorough process and thought as highly individualized. Um, so again, I didn't come here today and I'm not telling you use these tools, don't use these tools, because I don't know all the stakeholders in your specific situation. I don't know the language that's written into your policy. I don't know what are the specific encryption methods of any of the tools that you're specifically thinking of using. So that's why we cannot have a one size fits all answer to these things. We need to make this highly individualized. We need to consider variables that are both personal and professional. If we take the idea of, I just need to collect information from outside of ourselves or outside myself and don't look at like, well, what are my biases? What are my draws? What are my morals? I'm going to not do a comprehensive and effective job at making a decision. Remember, there's not just you as the clinician involved, but we can identify at least or conceptualize at least four different layers from macro down to micro. There's many impacts and many influences on all these decisions. But of course, be informed, do your research, and document. Document the process, document your intention, document along the way. And I think that's what I would say. So thank you for attending today. Like I said, oh, before I forget, we have references here. As was mentioned, you'll be seeing a email or other communication that will give you access to slides. And this is just part 2 of 3. So August 15th, Dr. Kimberly Applewhite will be presenting on our third part of this AI series. So I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you so much for participating in the chat. I really appreciate you showing up in that way. And also, I hope you are coming away like that you could, starting today, answer these questions for yourself. know at least the starting point and what to do from there of how do I figure this out. So thank you everybody for attending. I appreciate you being here.